Hey guys, welcome to another episode of our Home-Based Shop. This week I'm going to make an LS1 standalone loom and make it run by itself. Then I'm going to make a fan shroud for my Corolla wagon. And then I'm going to make a fuse box and relay panel for the toy waste. Let's get into it. Just a reminder, if you have any questions based on the channel or myself, leave them in the comments below and we'll get to them in a later video. I want to put them all together and do a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, comment below. Let's get into it. Alright, so I just got my standalone LS Loom that I made hooked up to the motor, and then we've got the power for the ECU. They're all currently just going to one spot. I have been making a fuse box, which I'll show you later. And then we've got the fuel pump, which is a black wire because that's the wrong colour, and then a starter. So if I hook the fuel pump and the ECU up to power, which I'll do now, and then get the starter wire. The LS is all tested and ready to go, so I can actually wrap all this up. So I can probably take all the loom off, wrap it all. That's a later problem. And then I've got to make this stuff go to the fuse box and we'll be in action. Also, just quickly, I bought this tank and another little one there. These are just off eBay. They were probably like 35 bucks each. So this one's a radiator, or for the coolant, sorry. So it's going to go over there. Another one over here for the fuel. And then I've got a little switch panel coming for the middle. And we can have a self-contained running cooling engine. So pretty excited to do that. I'm just waiting for the switch panel to get in before I mount anything. And the other one of these, so that one doesn't have actual barb for the fuel and it doesn't have a barb for the return. It just has a single hole. So I'm gonna have to do something about that one. But this is now running and my new loom works out well. So if you need an LS loom, hit me up. But we'll see how this all progresses later. Just need to get those switch panel in and I can finish up the rest of this frame. So I just packed up the LS and put it in the corner. I just remembered that one last thing I need to do is get another fuel system. This one's going on the toy waste and is actually quite good quality. I want to get something a little bit cheaper that can just run the motor with no load. So that'll get mounted on the front with the two tanks that I showed you and the switch panel that's still not here. So we'll get back to this when I have the required parts, but for now we'll just finish this loom and then put it aside. Alright, so just quickly before I wrap this loom up, I thought I should probably explain it. So I've cut a lot of stuff out. I cut the MAF out. I've cut all the trans stuff, so the reverse lights, all of the gear indicator stuff, all of the kick downs, all that sort of stuff, that's all come out. And basically all you're left with is the sensors, coil packs, injectors, and the O2 sensors. So it's pretty basic. So I found a wiring pin out on the internet that had all the pins for the two connectors here. Just went through that list, found stuff that I knew I didn't need, got rid of them, and everything I knew I did need, I pointed off this side. So in saying that, I've got the tacho just here, which I'm not going to use just yet. Then I've got the high and low speed in and the speed sender out, or the speedo out, which I'll get to later. That's a later problem for later, Jeff. And then on this loom over here, I've got this plug, which I'm going to make go to an OBD2 plug. So that's just two earths, the CAN sensor wire, and the orange power from the battery. So then we've got fuel pump and fan. Can't remember which is which, but fuel pump and fan. Then we've got the two earths for the OBD2 plug, which will need to go to its own earth. Then we've got red, which is the right hand bank of the ignition and the injectors. We've got the green one down here, which is the left hand bank for the injectors and the coils. We've got pink, which is ignition power, and orange, which is the battery power. So because I don't have a two-stage ignition switch, I just have a toggle switch, I'm going to hook up the pink and the green to the same source, and also the green and the red for the ignition banks. So all of it will be on one switch, and it's all going to be relayed, which I'll show you later. And then the fan and the fuel pump, they get turned on from the relay, so these two wires turn on a relay, not get power from, which will make a bit more sense later. But that's basically it. So you turn off power to the ECU, you turn off power to the loom, you turn off power to the sensors, the whole thing turns off. So that's pretty much all there is to it. I'm going to wrap this in conduit now, and I'll get to the fuse box later in the episode. Look what just got dropped off! So one quick thing before I move on to the next job. The pinout that I found, this is basically all you need. So the brown wire is the tacho, the green with the white trace is the fuel pump, orange is 12 volt constant for the ECU, pink is 12 volt ignition, green is 12 volt ignition for the left hand bank, coils and injectors, red is the right hand side for the same thing, blue with the white trace is the fan, pink with the blue trace is the ignition, and the yellow is for the can. Then if you want to do an OBD2 plug, you'll just need the yellow, an orange, and 2 earths. So that's pretty much it. I've also started making the fan shroud for the wagon, so I'm going to probably continue on this tomorrow. So the big circle has to get cut out, and then there's 3 spots here. I'm going to put 3 little dimple dies, and then need to crimp the edges and make it look pretty nice. And then that'll go on here. The fan is offset, and then the dimple dies will come down here, and I'll put a little bit of like rubber on it, so when you're moving, the rubber lifts up, and when you're stopped, it uses the fan to pull the air. So hopefully this will work out nicely. I'm going to have to cut these tabs off and get someone to weld on another little panel to bolt to, because I don't like these and they need to be as slimline as possible. So they're going, and I'm going to add some new ones on there. So I went to the big green shed this morning and got some jigsaw blades, so let's try and cut this out. Alright, so we've got the fan shroud cut out. Just cut it with a jigsaw as you just saw. It's come out reasonably decent. I need to give it a file to make the edges nice and smooth. Next thing I want to do is cut 3 holes here. So I've got a kit that's sort of like a dimple die, but it cuts a hole, and then I want to dimple die it anyway. So I'll probably cut the holes now, and then do the dimple dyeing once I've done all the flange stuff that I want to do. So I'll just get those out from over there and show you what I'm working with. Alright, so this is the kit I've got. I can't remember what these are called for the life of me. But basically there's a die like that, and a die with teeth on it, and then you center it all over with the bolt that is just there, and then pull the 2 together, and it cuts a nice big hole. So you use this thing, which I would call a porta power, or a type of. So to get it started, you've got to drill a hole through your sheet that is the size of this small bolt. So I'll do that in a second, and then you put this guy on there, and there's this cutter, which is the same size as the big bolt. So you put your sheet on, you put this on, put the nut on, then you porta power it through so it cuts a hole, and take this guy out, put the bolt in, put that through the piece of metal, and then put these guys on it. So I'm going to do it in a hyperlapse, and hopefully it makes a bit more sense. Alright, so we cut those holes out. Like I said, it just pushes the metal out. So if you wanted to keep the center, I would suggest a hole saw, but this thing works so well. I really can't remember the name of it, but it's very good. And these are straight off the press, I guess. No sharp edges at all whatsoever on the front, and the back. It's a little bit, it's very square. It's probably the best way of putting it. It's not sharp, but it's very square. So if you just ran a file over the back, you'd probably get away with it. Or if you're only touching the front, just leave it. So I would like to dimple die this later. I may have done the thing that I always do, and you can't actually fit the dimple die in here. I'm really hoping I didn't do that this time, because I do that nearly every single time I use the dimple dies. But I also can't find them, so that's a later problem. So for now, what I'm going to do is put a flange on this the whole way around, like a little step, because this is actually quite flimsy, as you can imagine. So for that flange, I'm going to use the joggler, which I have shown before. So it just puts a step into the panel. So this is exactly the material that it should be using. Really thin alley, and well, really thick sheet metal also works, but that thing is an absolute weapon. So hopefully put some nice edges on this, and maybe a little bend here and there, and it should come out pretty good. But first I want to clearance this because it doesn't fit around where the hoses go. So I want to make those two fit, make sure everything actually bolts up, there's nowhere to actually bolt it just yet. And then put some flanges in it, some bends in it, make it nice and rigid. Alright, well that's coming out pretty good so far. So I got the fan on, I got the holes drilled, could bolt it together. I still haven't done the flanges obviously, but I've cut the 2 reliefs for the radiator hoses and 1 for the little tap. So I'll take this off. So coming over to the radiator, I'm going to put it on from the bottom in first, and then it all kind of lines up reasonably well. So I had to cut the tabs off, which I knew was coming anyway, but now I'm going to have to get someone to weld some stuff on there so it can actually bolt together. But that's how it looks, and the fan overlaps a little bit here, but not a huge amount, and it actually fits pretty good. So the next thing to do is the flanges. So I need to crank the air compressor and get some flange happening. So this is the joggler tool that I was talking about. And you want to make sure this is the correct way that you would like the panel to be stepped. So I want the end to be further down. So I normally start a little bit off the end so that you get a nice crisp edge. Make sure it's bottomed out all the way where my finger is. And then just pull the trigger. That puts a nice little dent or joggle in the panel. And then once you do that the whole way along, it's nice and stiff. Alright, so we got the fan mount all done. I still need to get the little tabs welded on to hold this panel to the radiator itself. But we've got everything cleaned up, got everything flanged that I want to. Got the fan actually bolted on there, and it's all pretty rigid now compared to how it was. So I do want to put foam underneath and in between everything before I bolt this together for a final time. And I also need to get some little rubber flaps for these guys to try and do that idea that I was talking about earlier. I can't find my dimple dies, but I also realised that if I leave it like this, it's probably going to seal a bit better with that rubber that lays flat. So I'm going to just leave it and see how it goes. I might need to remake this, it might not fit at all, I don't know. So let's get into the next job. So the next thing to do is to jump into a fuse and relay panel for the Toyoways behind me. So this is basically just for the engine. Most people only run 5 relays, being 3 for the fan, starter and fuel, and then 2 for the ECU. So I've got 7 because I'm a bit extra, and I've separated the right hand and left hand bank of the coil and injectors, because apparently that's the way GM did it, and if you pull one of those fuses you can still run the motor on 4 cylinders on one entire bank. Don't know how true it is, but I want to find out. So I have done those separately, so I've got 7 relays, which is a bit much, but that's why I've made the fuse box like the way I have, and not one of those cute little like block things that I had for this previously. So the other thing I need to run through this panel is the ignition switch itself, the starter switch itself, and probably a fuel pump switch or similar. So there's a few things going on, and then if I do have room I'll add headlights and all that sort of stuff as well, because this thing has no body loom as well. So that's going to be a problem for later, but for now let's jump into the fuse panel. Alright, so I've been really horrible at filming lately. I've been making this fuse box relay setup, so I accidentally bought relays with fuses in them, so I don't actually need this, but it's a good distribution block at the very least. Later on when I go to do the wagon I might steal these relays and put the other ones that I've got on here instead. So here we go. So the idea is main power comes in, goes to this guy, they feed to all the relays, and then you have each relay on a different switch. So these guys are going to be probably your ignition, and then you've got starter, fan and fuel pump. So pretty simple little guy. I haven't done the other lot of wires obviously, so there's stuff that needs to come in and stuff that needs to come out, and it's later. So what you just saw then will get you up to scratch with where I'm at now. So you can see I've added a bunch of wire. These are all way longer than they need to be, I hope. So the plan is, I've got 2 earths here, which I didn't show previously. So the whole panel is going to get earthed, and then everything will earth to the panel. Then we've got the power for the ECU side. So this is the ECU, the sensor powers, and then the left and right hand bank I was talking about earlier. So they all get power from this panel here, this set of wires here. So that is getting power from here. So it's a bit confusing, I know, but the power comes out of here, goes to the switch, comes back and turns on all the relays. Then the relays get their main power from this fuse panel as well. So everything's like double fused, I guess. Then we've got the main power in, which will go straight to the battery. So that'll probably be live all the time. And then we've got the start, fan and fuel. So the starter obviously gets power from the panel, goes through these wires to the switch for the starter, comes back, turns the relay on, starter gets power from the block, turns the relay on, turns the starter on. So then it gets a little bit confusing. So the fan and the fuel pump you would think would need to be on a switch. So the wires come from the ECU, they go into the fan and the fuel, into these 2 terminals on the side, and the ECU actually switches the relay on, then they get power from this block, rather than having a switch for the fan and fuel. It comes from the ECU as like a digital switch. So then that puts power out to the 2 wires that I haven't added in yet, which go to the fan and to the fuel pump. So I need to do those 4 wires. So there's 2 in from the ECU for the fan and fuel pump, then there's 2 out for the fan and fuel pump. So I need to do those 4 wires. Then I also need to run the 4 wires that come from the ECU to turn on the left hand right hand bank, the sensor power and the ECU. So they go on the bottom terminal, which you can kind of see. There's those 4 to add, and then I need to run a power wire for the starter. So when this relay turns on, that wire that I haven't added goes to the starter, turns the starter on, and the engine runs. So I realise that's a bit of a mouthful and it's a bit awkward if you don't know how this stuff works, but hopefully it makes sense enough that you can get by. So then looking at this a bit further, you can see I've only got 1 terminal left. So I'm not going to use that just yet. We'll see what I do end up using that with. Just leave the fuse out so it doesn't have power on it. Then I've used one of the relay mounts to mount this P-clamp, and that just gives us a bit of cable management and cleaned it all up. So whether the ECU comes in from this side and goes in the back, or if it comes in this side and goes across like everything else, I'm not too sure yet. We'll wait till we get this in the car and work it out from there. So this could be a lot more compact obviously, but I just wanted to keep it nice and laid out, so if I do have any engine issues, it's easy. I'm probably going to need to add a couple more relays for the headlights and the wipers and whatever else I decide to put in this thing. It's going to be pretty bare bones, so probably headlights and tail lights and indicators, and we'll call it good. So this is going to get put aside for now. It's pretty much as done as it can be until I have everything mounted to that LS frame. So I'm just going to put this aside and then we'll get back to it at a later date. Alright, if you've stuck in this long, thank you very much for watching. Leave a comment, ask me a question, and come back next week to see another video. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.